Cass, today let's talk about music criticism. The people who write about it, talk about it, decide whether something is good or not, tasteful or not, whether it qualifies as fine art.
That's pretty deep. Kick us off.
Absolutely. The mission for you today is to explore that that electrifying moment that rock and roll, the Beatles specifically, was finally taken seriously by the cultural elite.
And maybe more importantly, the totally unexpected reaction of the creators themselves to all this highbrow acceptance.
Exactly. We're going to explore the ultimate value of intuition versus theory in art. How did four young men with, pretty minimal formal training manage to create compositions so sophisticated that classical critics immediately started comparing them to Bach and Mahler?
It's such a great question. It's really the ultimate artistic paradox, isn't it? The ability to create something that's seen as worthy of comparison to the highest European classical masters.
Right.
Simply because it felt right. Not because they were following some kind of rule book.
Not at all.
And understanding this dynamic, this collision of high theory and just raw instinct, it really sets the stage for everything that followed in popular music. It completely redefined what serious musical composition could even be.
Okay, so let's set the scene for this foundational moment. It happens almost by accident in late 1963. This is the absolute height of Beatlemania. They're still largely seen as, a frivolous, screaming teenage sensation.
Right, mop tops, not serious artists.
Precisely. And that's when William Mann, who was the esteemed, very influential music critic for the Times of London, turns his analytical eye away from his usual subjects.
Beethoven symphonies, new works by Britten, that sort of thing.
Exactly. He turns away from all that and focuses instead on these four young guys.
And Mann's stature is what makes this moment so profound. He was one of the foremost authorities on Western classical music in the entire English-speaking world.
So his readership, they're expecting him to discuss high culture. And instead, on December 27th, 1963, he dedicates his very serious analysis to a rock band. The intellectual shockwave from that, can't overstate it.
And his core assertion was just seismic. He declared John Lennon and Paul McCartney the outstanding English composers of 1963.
Just think about that. Placing them above established, formally trained composers in England, it was a massive cultural declaration.
But he didn't just stop at praise, did he? He dove deep into the analysis.
He did. He focused on a John Lennon deep cut from their second album, With the Beatles. The song was not a second time.
And this is where the terminology gets really interesting and, frankly, pretty confusing for anyone who isn't steeped in music theory.
For sure. But Mann's language was very deliberate. He was signaling to his classical audience that, hey, this music is structurally worthy of your attention.
He praised the song's ending, its sophisticated ending, and he cited an Aeolian cadence at the end.
An Aeolian cadence. And just to underline the historical weight he was giving this, he added that this progression was the same kind that ends Gustav Mahler's massive orchestral work, Song of the Earth.
That's just an incredible comparison. Mahler.
So for our listeners, maybe we should clarify what an Aeolian cadence even implies.
Yeah, that's a good idea. In classical theory, most music resolves with a really strong sense of finality. It's called a perfect cadence.
Right, it feels finished.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Aeolian mode, on the other hand, is a minor scale.
Wow.
It's often older, folk-derived. So an Aeolian cadence is a harmonic progression that kind of avoids that strong pull toward a final resolution.
So it feels more ambiguous.
Ambiguous, maybe a little melancholic. It has an archaic sound rather than that bright, definitive end you get in standard pop. So Mann was hearing harmonic sophistication. He was hearing an intentional avoidance of musical cliches.
Whether the Beatles intended it or not.
That's the key question.
Yeah.
And he didn't stop there. He threw around other famously dense terms. He talked about chains of Pandiatonic clusters in the song This Boy.
Chains of Pandiatonic clusters. If you read that, you'd have to assume the Beatles were secretly studying advanced counterpoint at night, right?
You would.
So what are Pandiatonic clusters in plain English?
Basically, it refers to notes played very close together, that's the cluster part, but still within the basic scale of the key. So they're dissonant, but not totally chaotic.
Okay, so it creates a kind of tension.
A tense, slightly jarring effect, but it stays rooted in the home key. Mann was basically saying that the Beatles were using dissonance and tension in a way that had been, previously reserved for 20th century classical composers.
Not 3-minute pop songs.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
He also wrote about the major tonic sevenths and ninths built into their tunes and the use of flat submediant key switches.
He wasn't just saying their music was catchy. He was claiming it was compositionally masterful. He was saying they were using harmonic maneuvers that were considered advanced, even daring, in the classical world.
And the fascinating thing is the almost immediate practical effect this had. It instantly elevated the Beatles. They stopped being just four boys shouting catchy tunes.
And started being seen as genuine, serious creative forces in the UK.
But here's the crucial part, the almost comedic disconnect, the part that became legendary.
Lennon's confusion. The exotic birds moment.
Yes. The Beatles had absolutely zero idea what William Mann was talking about. They were genuinely and very openly baffled by all this terminology.
It's one of the greatest quotes in rock history. It comes from Lennon's 1980 Playboy interview. He confessed, and this quote just summarizes the whole paradox. "To this day, I don't have any idea what they are Aeolian cadences. They sound like exotic birds."
It's perfect. That sense of bemusement just perfectly captures the band's relationship with their own complexity. They heard a sound they liked, and they used it. End of story.
And Lennon, he totally got the functional utility of all this fancy terminology. He said that the sophisticated analysis made us acceptable to the intellectuals.
The critics needed a way to justify liking rock and roll, a genre that was so often dismissed as, primitive.
And this technical jargon, it provided the perfect intellectual cover. It was the license they needed to appreciate the music without sacrificing their academic dignity.
Exactly.
But the deeper question is, was William Mann even right? Was he hearing real, intentional classical structure, or was he just desperately trying to force pop music into a classical framework that didn't quite fit?
And musicologists have been arguing about the Aeolian cadence ever since. Many scholars believe Mann either just invented the term on the spot,
Or had a mental lapse.
right, because he wanted so badly to connect the band to high art.
So if you actually analyze the chords in Not a Second Time,
if you look at the progression, the song ends on a G major chord, resolving to an E minor chord.
G to E minor.
That progression is absolutely not a standard cadence by any classical measure. It's a really interesting chord change for sure, but it defies the rules.
So Mann was probably just grasping for a way to describe the harmonic ambiguity he was hearing?
I think so. The Beatles instinctively used chords that were subtly unsettling or unexpected.
Wow.
They forced the ear to follow the harmony in a way pop music usually didn't.
The irony is just so rich. In trying to apply the established rules of classical music, Mann only highlighted how intuitively the Beatles broke them.
He recognized the sophistication, but his vocabulary was limited to, 19th century Vienna. He didn't have the modern language to describe what was essentially an R&B influenced progression filtered through British pop.
It's a moment of incredible cultural insecurity from the critics. They had to justify their own taste by referencing Mahler.
Which leads us right to the core question. If the academic rulebook wasn't being followed, what guiding principles were the Beatles actually using in the studio? What was the source of this unconscious genius?
Let's shift from the critics to the creators. We have Lennon's 1973 interview where he gives us the Beatles' core philosophy, feeling over understanding.
I love this quote.
He said, "Intellectuals have the problem of having to understand it. They can't feel anything. The only way to get an intellectual is to talk to him and then play him the record."
That is just the perfect encapsulation of the difference, isn't it? The creator focuses on the emotional truth, the pure sound of the moment. They trust their gut.
While the critic focuses on structure, history, taxonomy.
Right. For the Beatles, they wrote from instinct. From what sounded good to their collective ears. They were definitely not thinking about Mahler or Schubert while sitting down with their guitars.
No, they were thinking about Smokey Robinson and the Miracles.
Exactly.
Lennon himself said his influence for writing Not a Second Time came from the sophisticated R&B and Motown arrangements coming out of the States. Music built on groove and feel, not modal harmony.
And yet somehow their internal wiring and their collaborative process led them to these musical ideas that the critics could only describe using the most rarefied language of the classical canon.
This is where we have to bring in George Martin, the indispensable collaborator who served as the crucial translator between the band's boundless instinct and the technical execution needed to bring it all to life.
He wasn't the professor. He was the facilitator. He had the formal academic background composition and orchestration training at London's Guildhall School of Music. But he understood his job was to serve the music, not to impose a curriculum on them.
Oh, absolutely. If Martin had tried to impose academic theory, saying, no, John, you need a V7 chord here, the Beatles would have either rebelled or worse.
Their music would have become stiff and predictable.
Exactly. Instead, as George Harrison so beautifully put it, Martin was there to interpret our strangeness. It was a dynamic based entirely on sound and feeling, not on sheet music.
And it was truly a two-way education. Martin brought the vastness of the orchestral world to them, suggesting instruments they had never even considered.
There's that wonderful memory from Lennon,
Yeah.
Martin gently asking if they'd ever heard an oboe.
And the four of them, the most famous musical group in the world, replying, no, which one's that one?
The juxtaposition of that global fame and just fundamental musical naivete is astonishing.
It's incredible. And Martin managed to bridge that knowledge gap without ever being condescending. He'd do it by suggesting ideas based purely on the feeling a song evoked.
He translated their abstract emotional ideas into concrete classical arrangements.
A perfect example is Yesterday. Paul McCartney had the finished melody and chords, a perfect, intimate song. Martin suggested a string quartet.
And not because theory dictated it.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But because the intimate, melancholic mood of the song just demanded a counterpoint that was simple and deeply emotional.
And McCartney was resistant at first, wasn't he? He was worried it would sound too classical, too highbrow for pop.
He was. The breakthrough came when Martin played the composition back to him in the style of Bach to demonstrate the structural integrity and emotional possibility of the arrangement.
So McCartney only saw the value once he heard the sound and the feeling of it, not by reading the theory. The ear was still leading the mind.
Always. And maybe the most famous example of this radical translation is on Tomorrow Never Knows from Revolver.
Right. Lennon walks into the studio and tells Martin he wants his vocal to sound like he's chanting from a mountaintop.
Like a Dalai Lama speaking across a valley.
It's an unbelievably abstract, non-musical concept. Most producers would be tearing their hair out, talking about reverb or echo.
But Martin, instead of lecturing them about acoustics or proper mic techniques, found a technical solution that had never been applied that way before. He ran Lennon's voice through a Leslie speaker cabinet.
And a Leslie cabinet, that's for a Hammond organ, right?
Typically, yes. It uses internal rotating horns and drums to create this wavering, swirling Doppler effect. Martin took this piece of equipment, meant for an organ, and applied it to a lead vocal.
And it instantly achieved that ethereal, disembodied, mountaintop sound Lennon was after.
It did. Martin used his complex technical knowledge, but purely to serve the artist's spontaneous abstract instruction. Theory was only there to serve instinct, never to restrict it.
That partnership, combined with the Beatles' growing confidence and curiosity, it led to a major philosophical shift in 1965. The album Rubber Soul, released that December. It's often cited as the inflection point.
It's where they stopped being purely a commercial pop group and became conscious artists. They started treating the studio as their primary instrument.
George Martin recalled that Rubber Soul was the first album that presented a new Beatles to the world.
They were consciously beginning to think about albums as a bit of art in their own right, and that was a huge philosophical commitment. The album was now a unified statement, a concept, not just a collection of singles and, contractual filler.
And the instrumentation reflected that. Harrison brought in the sitar for the first time on Norwegian wood, introducing these exotic textures that just shattered the standard pop mold.
For Lennon, that album had his major breakthrough moment in lyrical depth, the song In My Life.
He called it his first real major piece of work.
Right, because it was the first song he wrote that was consciously, autobiographically about his actual life. He was reflecting on his past, his relationship with Liverpool. It was sophisticated in sentiment, not just in harmony.
And what's wild is that spark of personal depth was planted by a journalist.
I know. A reporter challenged him, basically saying, why don't you write songs with the same personal, reflective voice you use in your book? In his own right.
It shows that the critical world was already pushing them toward deeper introspection, and Lennon just rose to the occasion masterfully.
And this period was fueled so intensely by competition. The mid-60s were this period of intense musical one-upmanship. The Beatles were pushing and being pushed by their peers.
Particularly Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys.
Oh, yeah. Wilson himself has detailed how profoundly Rubber Soul affected him. He recalled, "It really made me want to record. It made me want to cut." He felt the album sounded like a cohesive collection of songs that belonged together.
A trait he immediately tried to replicate with pet sounds.
He did. He called the atmosphere in the industry a competitive bug, where everybody was turning everybody on, creating this impossibly fast cycle of innovation.
It's fantastic evidence. The two biggest bands in the world were just constantly trying to out-innovate each other in sound and depth.
And the Beatles were surprisingly gracious about it. When an NME Readers poll in late '66 placed the Beach Boys as the top vocal group beating the Beatles' Ringo Starr was so cool about it.
What did he say?
He said, "We're all 4 fans of the Beach Boys. Maybe we voted for them."
That's great. So by 1966, the band makes this crucial career-defining decision. They stop touring completely.
McCartney said their touring schedule had pushed the band to their limits artistically. By stepping away from the road, they could commit entirely to the studio. They transformed into full-fledged sonic experimentalists.
The studio was no longer just a place to record a song. It was a laboratory.
It was a lab where sound itself could be manufactured, manipulated, and sculpted.
And the numbers, they just starkly illustrate this transformation. Think about their debut album. It took, 12 hours to record?
Something like that. Rubber Soul, their artistic turning point, took less than 80 hours.
Then you get to Revolver in 1966. The pinnacle of their experimentation up to that point.
Yeah.
Revolver took over 220 hours to record.
That massive investment of time and creative energy was all spent chasing these incredibly difficult, abstract sonic goals.
Those 220 hours weren't just spent tracking acoustic guitars.
No, they were spent on painstaking technical details. They were exploring new recording techniques, new instruments, new ways of thinking, fueled in part by their exploration of LSD.
Right. Lennon and Harrison especially were chasing the sound of the subconscious mind. They wanted the sound of a dream, the sound of chaos, the sound of a spiritual experience.
And they employed revolutionary technical innovations to get there, guided by Martin and the engineers. They used vari-speed editing, running the tape machine slower or faster than normal while recording, to give vocals and instruments this otherworldly, shifting tone.
They manually superimposed crowd noise onto tracks like Yellow Submarine. They used crossfading to create the illusion of a continuous album experience.
And the tape loops. That was a Herculean effort. For Tomorrow Never Knows, they'd record random sound symbols, guitars, reversed effects onto tape, cut it, loop it, and feed it back into the mix.
Creating these chaotic, collage-like soundscapes that were purely avant-garde.
Influenced by composers like Karlheinz Stockhausen. And at the same time, George Martin was scoring orchestral arrangements that combined the modal complexity of Indian classical music, which Harrison was studying, with Western classical composition. They were just integrating everything.
And this intense creative period leads directly to their ultimate official formal acceptance, April 1967, just as their masterpiece, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, is about to drop.
This is when the cultural establishment gives its clearest, loudest endorsement.
In the form of a CBS network television documentary, it was called Inside Pop, The Rock Revolution.
And the host wasn't some rock journalist, it was Leonard Bernstein.
The conductor of the New York Philharmonic, composer of West Side Story, maybe the most important pillar of American high culture at the time.
No question. And Bernstein, he's there analyzing Beatles songs like a music professor. He's at a piano, dissecting the structural complexity for a prime-time national audience.
He noted the unexpected key and tempo changes in songs like Good Day Sunshine and She Said, She Said, demonstrating the intellectual architecture that was hiding under their pop accessibility.
And his comparisons were just incredibly lofty. He compared their compositional integrity to Bach and Schumann.
Bach and Schumann, the heavyweights.
Masters of counterpoint and the song cycle. And then he dropped the ultimate compliment for American music. He called Lennon and McCartney the finest songwriter since George and Ira Gershwin.
That wasn't just praise, that was canonization.
It was. And the significance just cannot be overstated. This was unprecedented. Rock music was officially presented on national television as a genuine art form, worthy of the exact same serious analysis that was usually only reserved for classical masters.
It elevated the anticipation for Sgt. Pepper to that of a major artistic event. One critic called it a song cycle worthy of Robert Schumann.
So the Beatles were validated. And by extension, the entire genre of ambitious popular music was validated.
Which brings us all the way back to the central paradox. The sophisticated harmonic moves, the unexpected key changes, the structural complexity that Bernstein and Mann were praising.
None of it was consciously planned via academic theory.
It was the sound of four people trusting their ear over the book.
It's a beautiful irony. Critics were dissecting their chord progressions with conservatory terminology, seventh chords, flat submediants.
But the creators were just trying to find the sound that resonated emotionally, and we have so much evidence of their fundamental lack of formal training.
I mean, Paul McCartney, despite having this intuitive mastery of melody and harmony, never learned to read sheet music.
He could play the piano beautifully, hear the chords in his head, but couldn't sit down and read a complex score.
And Lennon's process was even more instinctual. He'd compose melodies first, and then just fit chords around them, working entirely by ear, focused on simplicity and honesty.
And George Harrison's journey into exotic music was self-taught, too.
Right. He taught himself sitar by obsessively listening to Ravi Shankar records, not by studying traditional raga theory in a classroom. It was pure mimicry, absorption, and dedication.
We see this disconnect again in the Yesterday story. McCartney's initial resistance to the string quartet. It wasn't artistic, it was cultural. He felt a string quartet was too classical, too alien to the world of pop he lived in.
And it took George Martin, the translator, playing the composition in the rigorous, structured style of Bach to show that the purity of the composition could stand up to that academic interpretation.
He saw the value only once he heard the sound and the feeling of it, which just confirms, again, that the creative decision was still rooted in instinct.
So if the genius wasn't theory, what was the true source? It was practice, curiosity, and nonstop collaboration.
They weren't following a rule book. They were creating the rule book through sheer, concentrated time spent together.
We have to remember the thousands of hours they spent playing together, learning to communicate musically in the clubs of Liverpool and those grueling 7-hour sets in Hamburg. That crucible forged a shared, innate musical language.
That time taught them to communicate often without even needing words, let alone technical vocabulary. So when they went into the studio, their experimentation was driven by pure, simple instincts.
That sounds cool.
Right, or let's try this backwards and see what happens. That spirit of what if is the real engine of their genius.
And the fact that these purely instinctive choices led them to harmonically sophisticated results, progressions that accidentally conform to the standards of high classical music, that is the true measure of their ability.
It was an academic study. It was the product of obsessive listening, endless rehearsal, genuine musical curiosity, and an openness to experimentation. It's profoundly rare in any art form.
They were genuine sponges, absorbing influences from every corner of the musical universe.
Chuck Berry and Little Richard, the tight, complex arrangements of Motown English folk music.
The structural complexity of Indian classical music, the sonic madness of avant-garde composers like Karlheinz Stockhausen.
And they filtered all of that diverse input through their own collaborative four-way sensibility. They didn't analyze the rules, they just internalized the sounds.
Which brings us back full circle to the exotic birds quote. Lennon was never being intentionally anti-intellectual. He was just being honest about his process.
He made music from the heart and the gut.
The critics, though, they needed to categorize it using the terminology they had applied to Mahler and Schubert. And ultimately, that intellectual impulse served a massive cultural purpose, far beyond the four musicians themselves.
That validation helped transform rock and roll from ephemeral entertainment into a serious, recognized art form. William Mann's review made the band acceptable to the intellectuals.
And Leonard Bernstein's documentary solidified rock's status as a genuine object of scholarly study on a global stage. This mattered profoundly for every artist who came after them.
The Beatles didn't need the critics to push boundaries. They were going to do that anyway.
But the validation opened doors. It gave cultural permission for popular music to be ambitious, experimental, and serious. It told every songwriter that their 3-minute pop song could hold the same artistic weight as a symphony.
That is the enduring legacy of the critics' attempts to label the exotic birds. They legitimized an entire generation of creative freedom.
The key takeaway, really, is that true musical genius can stem from pure intuition and collaborative experience, even if the result conforms beautifully to high academic standards.
And the critics' need to label and categorize ultimately serve to legitimize an entire genre.
The ability to trust your intuition so completely that your output accidentally conforms to the highest standards of academic excellence. I mean, that is the definition of instinctive genius.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Whatever you feel like knowing more about the Beatles, visit us at BeatlesRewind.com. Every day we do something new there. Song reviews, album reviews, movie reviews, documentaries, trivia, all things Beatles, every day, 8 days a week. You can find us on the website, BeatlesRewind.com. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Amazon Podcasts, practically anywhere on the intertubes. The Beatles, all day, every day. Cass, we'll do it again tomorrow, right?
Absolutely. Talk to you then.
Until next time, when you listen,
Your mind conducts its own symphony.